My name is Staff Sergeant David Torres, and I kept a secret for 7 years that almost killed me from the inside out. Not from enemy fire. Not from an IED. From silence. I'm going to tell you what happened on a mountain ridge in a country whose name I still can't say out loud. I'm going to tell you about the night I stopped believing in coincidence and started believing in God. And if you think you know how this story goes, if you think you've heard it all before, I'm asking you to stay with me anyway. Because what happened to me wasn't some warm feeling or peaceful moment in a church pew. It was violent. It was terrifying. It was the most real thing I've ever experienced. And it saved my life. Before I go any further, you need to understand who I was before that night. I wasn't some Bible-thumping soldier who carried scripture in my chest pocket. I wasn't the guy who prayed before missions or talked about God's plan. I grew up Catholic, the kind where you show up on Christmas and Easter, sit in the back, leave early. My grandmother had rosary beads. My mother lit candles. I thought it was all tradition, culture, something you did because that's what our family did. But actually believing that some divine being was out there paying attention to my life, that felt like weakness to me. I thought strong people made their own way. I thought faith was a crutch for people who couldn't handle the randomness of existence. And I was handling it just fine, thank you. I had control. I had training. I had a rifle and brothers beside me and a chain of command that made sense of chaos. That's what I told myself anyway. Right up until the moment every single one of those things failed me at once. I joined the Army at 18. Houston, Texas. My old man had been a Marine. My uncle did 2 tours in the first Gulf War. Military service was just what men in my family did. You graduated high school, you signed the papers, you became someone who mattered. Infantry all the way. I was good at it too. Really good. Made sergeant before most of my basic training class made specialist. I knew how to lead, knew how to shoot, knew how to keep my guys alive when everything went sideways. 3 deployments before the one that changed everything. Iraq twice. Afghanistan once. I'd seen combat, I'd been in firefights, I'd watched helicopters carry away friends in body bags, but I always came home, always made it through. And somewhere deep down, I started to believe I was untouchable, not in some stupid, reckless way, just in that quiet confidence that separates the living from the dead in war zones. I thought I had it figured out. I thought training and skill and experience would be enough. They weren't. My wife Emma knew something was different before I left for that 4th deployment. She watched me pack my gear in our bedroom, folding shirts, checking equipment, and she said it out loud. This one feels different. I told her every deployment feels different, told her I'd be fine, told her the same lies soldiers have been telling their wives since the beginning of war. She kissed me at the airport anyway, she always did. We flew out on a Wednesday night. C-130 transport, seats that felt like sitting on plywood, the smell of fuel and nervous sweat. Landed at a forward operating base that was really just a collection of barriers and tents and exhausted faces that had seen too much. Our mission was counterinsurgency. That's what they called it in briefings. What it actually meant was walking around hostile territory every day hoping you didn't step on something that would blow your legs off, hoping the guy selling fruit in the market wasn't the same guy setting up ambushes at night, hoping your luck held just one more day. My team was 4 men including me. Sergeant Kyle Matthews ran point. He was from Oregon, tall and quiet, the kind of guy who could read terrain like other people read newspapers. He never wasted words, never showed fear, never complained. When Kyle told you something, you believed it. Specialist James Park was our comms and tech guy. 23 years old, Korean-American kid from California who could fix literally anything. Radio died, Park fixed it. Computer glitched, Park had it running in 5 minutes. He made terrible jokes at the worst possible times, but that's what kept us sane. Private First Class Tyler Bennett was the baby, just turned 21, first deployment. Still had that clean, eager look that combat hadn't worn off yet. Good kid, scared but trying not to show it. Exactly like I'd been on my first tour. I looked after him the way my first squad leader had looked after me. We'd been in country for 14 weeks when the mission came down. Intelligence had been tracking enemy movement through a mountain valley about 30 miles from base. Supply routes, they thought, logistics, they wanted confirmation, they wanted eyes on the ground, so they sent a convoy, 6 vehicles, 28 soldiers, supposed to be a standard reconnaissance patrol, in and out, 36 hours maximum. I remember the briefing. Maps spread on tables under fluorescent lights, officers pointing at ridgelines, everyone nodding like this was just another Tuesday. And maybe it was, maybe that's the thing about war. You're always just one routine mission away from everything changing forever and you never know which one it's going to be until it's too late. We rolled out at dawn. The terrain got rougher the deeper we went into the mountains. Roads became dirt paths became rocky trails cut into cliffsides. 1,000-foot drops on one side, vertical walls on the other, beautiful in a harsh, indifferent way, the kind of landscape that reminds you how small you are, how little control you actually have. About 4 hours in, our lead vehicle spotted movement on a northern ridge. We stopped. Protocol. Our lieutenant glassed the ridge with binoculars. Could have been civilians, could have been goat herders, could have been enemy scouts watching us, radioing our position, setting something in motion we couldn't see yet. The lieutenant made the call to divert. Take a secondary route through a narrower valley, better cover, harder angles for anyone watching. It seemed smart. It seemed like the kind of tactical thinking that keeps soldiers breathing. But that valley was a kill box waiting to be activated. The walls got steeper, the path got narrower, our radios started cutting out, reception breaking up against the terrain. Then the convoy stopped completely, rock slide ahead, path blocked, the engineers dismounted to clear it. That's when my team got the order. Move uphill, get to a vantage point on the eastern ridge, provide overwatch while the engineers work. Standard procedure. Should have been simple. Should have been an hour of sitting on rocks, watching the valley, then moving on. We grabbed our gear and started climbing. The slope was loose rock and dust. Every step felt like sliding backward. Kyle led, picking the best path, Park and Bennett behind him, me taking rear security. 25 minutes to reach a decent position. We found cover behind a cluster of boulders near the ridgeline. Good sightlines, good protection. I radioed down that we were set. The response came back broken by static, but I heard enough to know they copied. That's when the world exploded. Not figuratively. I mean, the valley erupted with gunfire from 3 different ridgelines at once. RPGs streaking down toward our convoy. The crack and thunder of explosions echoing off the mountain walls. A perfectly coordinated ambush. They'd been waiting. They'd known exactly where we'd be. I watched vehicles burning below us. Watched soldiers scrambling. Heard screaming through the radio before it went completely dead. Then I realized the gunfire wasn't just down there. It was coming at us. Rounds started snapping past our position, that horrible crack they make when they pass close to your head, rock dust kicking up, ricochets whining. We dropped behind the boulders and returned fire, but there were too many of them, way too many. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. Tried again. Dead air. We were cut off from the convoy with no communication and an unknown number of fighters moving up the ridge toward our position. Kyle looked at me with those calm eyes and said what we were all thinking. We need to move. Now, we started pulling back using fire and movement, the way we'd trained 1,000 times. One pair shoots while the other displaces, leapfrogging backward. But the ridge was a maze of rock formations and dead ends, and everywhere we turned there seemed to be more muzzle flashes, like they knew the terrain, like they knew exactly where we'd go. Park took a round through his pack. Missed his spine by maybe 3 inches. The impact knocked him flat, and for one horrible second I thought he was dead, but he gasped and got back up and we kept moving. Bennett was breathing too fast, that edge of panic setting in. I grabbed his shoulder and told him to stay with me, stay focused, we're getting out of this. But we weren't getting out. We were getting pushed into a corner. We ended up trapped on a finger ridge, a narrow spine of rock with cliff faces on 3 sides and enemy fighters closing in from the only exit. We set up a defensive position behind the best cover we could find, started rationing ammunition, only taking shots we knew would count. The sun was dropping, shadows filling the valley, and I realized with absolutely cold certainty that we weren't going to make it through the night. I counted magazines. Kyle had 1 left. Park had 1. Bennett had 1.5. I had 2. That's not enough, not even close, not against the number of fighters I'd seen. They were probing our position now, testing our response, figuring out how much ammo we had. They were patient, professional, they'd done this before. Kyle looked at me and I saw him doing the same math. Coming to the same conclusion. Park had given up trying to fix the radio, just sat with his back against rock, breathing hard, staring at nothing. Bennett kept his rifle up, but his hands were shaking. I don't know why I prayed. I'd never really prayed before, not like it mattered, not like anyone was listening. But in that moment, with darkness closing in and death feeling more like a schedule than a possibility, I didn't know what else to do. I closed my eyes, pressed my back against cold stone, and whispered words I barely believed. God, if you're real, if you're out there, we need help, we need a miracle. I'm not asking for me, I'm asking for them. These men, they have families, they have lives ahead of them. Please don't let them die on this ridge, please. Nothing happened. The gunfire continued. The darkness deepened. I opened my eyes and felt stupid for hoping, for breaking, for asking some cosmic force that probably didn't exist to fix a problem that was purely, brutally human. Kyle whispered that we had maybe 5 minutes before they rushed us. I nodded, checked my weapon one last time, prepared for the end. And then everything changed. I was looking down the ridge through my rifle scope trying to count enemy positions in the failing light when the entire ridgeline lit up like someone had turned night into day. Not the orange flicker of explosions, not the white flash of illumination rounds. This was different. This was a column of pure white gold light falling straight down from the sky. So bright I had to look away. So bright it cast hard shadows even though the sun was gone. My first thought was flare. But flares drift, they smoke, they die. This didn't move. It stood like a pillar between earth and sky, steady, silent, turning everything it touched into blazing clarity. I could see every rock, every cliff face, every shadow in the valley below like it was noon. And I could see the enemy fighters. Dozens of them. All along the ridgeline. And I could see them stopping. Just stopping. Like someone had frozen time. Park was next to me staring, and he breathed out a single word. What? Not a question. Just an acknowledgement that something impossible was happening and language couldn't keep up. The light stayed. 5 seconds. 10. I couldn't tell. Time felt broken. And in that light I felt something I'd never felt before. Something that didn't come from outside but from somewhere deep inside my chest, spreading out like warmth, like pressure, like a hand pressing over my heart. Not painful. Not frightening. The opposite. Calm. Certain. Safe. And then I heard it. Not with my ears. With something else. A voice that didn't make sound but filled up all the empty spaces inside me, deep and quiet and absolutely undeniable. Get up, you are safe, move now. The light faded. Not all at once, but like water draining, pulling back up into the sky it had come from, leaving only the natural darkness of mountain twilight. I blinked, trying to process, trying to find some rational explanation. But there wasn't one. And when my vision adjusted, I saw something that made absolutely no sense. The enemy fighters were retreating. Not tactically. Not in any organized way. They were running. Some dropped their weapons, some stumbled over rocks in their panic to get away, some just stood there frozen, staring at the sky at the place the light had been. Then they turned and fled into the darkness like something was chasing them. Though nothing was. Nothing we could see. The valley went silent. No gunfire. No explosions. Just wind and the sound of settling rocks and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I looked at Kyle and he looked at me, and neither of us spoke because what could you say? What words exist for something like that? Bennett broke the silence. His voice small and shaking. Sergeant Torres, what the hell just happened? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I was afraid to say it out loud. Afraid it would sound insane. Afraid it would make it less real. But Park, quiet genius Park, who believed in circuits and logic and things you could measure, he said what I was thinking. I think that was God. We sat there for another minute. Maybe longer. Waiting for the trek. The trap. The second wave. But nothing came. Just silence. Just darkness settling back in like it had never been interrupted. Then, moving like we were in a dream, we stood up. We moved forward along the ridge, weapons ready but hands steady now. That choking fear that had been suffocating us was gone, replaced by something I can only describe as confidence that didn't come from us. We walked for 30 minutes through terrain that should have been crawling with enemy fighters. Found nothing. No ambush. No resistance. Just empty ridgelines and scattered equipment left behind by people who'd run like the mountain itself was collapsing. We made it to a rally point, a flat area where we could finally see the valley, and that's where we got radio contact again. Our convoy had pulled back to a defensive position 3 kilometers south. When I reported our position and status, the response was confusion and relief. They thought we were dead. They'd been preparing to send a recovery team at first light to find bodies. When I told them the enemy had retreated, that we'd walked out untouched, there was a long silence on the other end. Then the question I knew was coming. Tours, what made them break contact? Did you call in air support? I looked at my team. At Kyle, who gave me a small nod. At Park, still staring at the sky. At Bennett, crying quietly, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. I keyed the radio and lied. Not sure, sir, they just broke contact. Because how do you tell your commanding officer that a pillar of light fell from heaven and saved your life? A Humvee picked us up 40 minutes later. The ride back to base was silent. Nobody talked about what we'd seen. Not then. Not for a long time. We went through debriefs, gave our statements, sat through intelligence assessments trying to piece together what had happened. Drone footage showed the ambush, showed our position getting overrun, showed the enemy retreat. But when analysts looked for the cause, they found nothing. No air support had been dispatched. No other units were in the area. No artillery. No illumination rounds. No technical explanation for why a coordinated ambush had suddenly collapsed. One analyst, a captain with tired eyes and too much coffee, told me privately that the enemy retreat made no sense. These weren't fighters who scared easy, he said. They had you dead to rights, perfect ambush, and then they just ran like they'd seen something that terrified them more than anything we could do. Yeah, I said, like that. He looked at me for a long moment. I think he wanted to ask what I really thought happened. But he didn't. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. Recovery was long. Painful. Not just physically. Emotionally. Nightmares. Guilt. Fear. Survivor's guilt, they called it, though that phrase felt too small for what I was carrying. All of it clung to me like shadows I couldn't shake. I finished my deployment, came home to Emma and our house and our life, but I wasn't the same man who'd left. Everyone said that's normal, that war changes you, that I just needed time. And maybe that was part of it. But the bigger part was carrying around this thing I couldn't talk about. This miracle I'd witnessed that didn't fit into any box the world had for it. I tried to go back to normal. Went to therapy. Took the pills they prescribed. Did the exercises. Smiled when I was supposed to smile. But at night when I closed my eyes, I was back on that ridge. Watching light fall from heaven. Feeling that impossible warmth in my chest. Hearing that voice telling me I was safe. And I didn't know what to do with it. Didn't know how to integrate it into a life that ran on logic and schedules and pretending everything made sense. Emma knew something was wrong. God bless her, she knew me better than I knew myself. She'd ask what I was thinking and I'd say nothing, just tired, and she'd look at me with those eyes that saw through every wall I built. She'd let it go because she knew I'd talk when I was ready. Except I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. How do you tell someone you love that you met God on a mountain and nothing feels real anymore? 8 months after I came home, I went to church. Not because anyone made me. Not because it was Easter or Christmas. I just woke up on a Sunday morning and felt this pull. This need. I told Emma I wanted to go. She looked surprised but didn't ask questions. Just got dressed and came with me. We sat in the back of a small church in our neighborhood, listened to a priest talk about faith and doubt and how God meets us in our darkest moments. And I felt that warmth again. That presence. Like something was confirming what I already knew but was too afraid to accept. After the service, I sat in the parking lot while Emma waited in the car. And I finally let myself cry. Not sad crying. Not angry crying. Just release. All the weight I'd been carrying, all the confusion and fear and wondering if I was losing my mind, it poured out of me in that church parking lot under a blue Texas sky. And when I was empty, when there was nothing left, I felt light. I felt clean. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start putting the pieces back together. I started reading the Bible. I'd never read it before, not really, just bits and pieces I half remembered from childhood. But now I read it like my life depended on it. And I found stories that sounded familiar. Pillars of fire leading people through darkness. Voices speaking to prophets. Light appearing in impossible moments. God showing up when everything seemed lost. It was all there. Written thousands of years ago by people who'd experienced the same impossible things I had. And suddenly I didn't feel crazy anymore. I felt connected to something ancient and true and bigger than any explanation the world could offer. I reached out to Kyle. He'd gotten out of the army, moved back to Oregon, was working construction with his uncle. We talked on the phone for 4 hours. He'd been carrying the same weight. The same questions. He told me he'd started going to a small church in his town, that he'd told his pastor what happened, and the pastor hadn't called him crazy, had just nodded and said sometimes God breaks through in ways we can't explain and the only thing we can do is witness to it. Tell the truth even when it sounds impossible. Park had a harder time. He'd always been the logical one, the one who needed equations and evidence. But he told me later that he couldn't explain away what he'd seen. He'd tried. He'd spent months looking for rational explanations, atmospheric phenomena, military technology, anything. But nothing fit. And finally he stopped fighting it. Stopped trying to make it make sense. Just accepted that something beyond human understanding had happened. That acceptance changed him. He started asking bigger questions, questions about purpose and meaning and whether the universe was random or designed. Last I heard, he was studying theology at a college in Northern California, still searching, still trying to understand, but open now in a way he'd never been before. Bennett took it the hardest. He was the youngest, the most shaken by how close we'd come to dying. He left the army as soon as his contract was up, went home to Georgia, disappeared for a while. I tried to reach him, but he didn't respond. I worried. But then, about 18 months after we got back, he called me. He was working with at-risk youth in his community, mentoring kids who were heading down bad paths. He told me that what happened on that ridge had given him a second chance at life and he wasn't going to waste it. He said he didn't know all the theological details, didn't know if he was doing faith right. But he knew someone had saved him and he owed it to that someone to live like it mattered. As for me, I stayed in the army for 3 more years, finished my commitment, then got out. I couldn't do it anymore. Not because I didn't believe in the mission or the men, but because I'd seen something that made everything else feel small. I needed to figure out what to do with this second chance I'd been given. Emma and I moved to a quieter town outside San Antonio. I took a job working with veterans, helping them transition back to civilian life, helping them carry the weight of things they couldn't talk about. Because I understood. I knew what it was like to come home with a story no one would believe. I started telling people. Not everyone. Not at first. But slowly, carefully, I shared what happened on that ridge with people I thought might listen. Some thought I was suffering from PTSD. Some smiled politely and changed the subject. But others, more than I expected, leaned in close and told me their own stories. Moments when they should have died but didn't. Times when impossible help arrived from nowhere. Experiences that defied explanation but felt undeniably real. And I realized I wasn't alone. There were others who'd seen beyond the curtain, who'd witnessed God moving in the world, and we found each other like survivors of the same storm. I told my story at a veterans group one night. About 15 guys, all dealing with their own demons, all trying to figure out how to live with what they'd seen and done. I didn't plan to say anything. But the conversation turned to faith and doubt and whether any of it mattered. And I felt that same pull I'd felt in the church parking lot. That same need to speak truth even if it sounded crazy. So I told them. Everything. The ambush. The terror. The prayer. The light. The voice. The rescue that came from somewhere beyond human reach. The room was silent when I finished. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, crossed a line, exposed too much. But then a guy named Martinez, a Marine who'd lost both legs in Kandahar and hadn't spoken in group for 4 months, he cleared his throat and said thank you. Said he'd been wondering if God gave a damn about people like us, people who'd done hard things in hard places. And hearing my story gave him something he'd lost. Hope maybe. Or permission to believe again. Others started sharing after that. Not all miracle stories like mine, but stories of moments when they'd felt something beyond themselves. A chaplain who showed up at exactly the right time. A letter from home that arrived on the worst day. A buddy who said the exact right thing to keep them from eating a bullet. Small things maybe, but not random. Not luck. Grace, one guy called it. Little pieces of grace holding us together when everything else was falling apart. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian. I'm not some holy man with all the answers. I'm just a soldier who saw something he can't explain and refuses to pretend it didn't happen. But I've learned some things in the years since that ridge. I've learned that God doesn't always show up the way we expect. He doesn't run on our schedule or follow our rules. But he shows up. Sometimes in whispers. Sometimes in pillars of light that split the darkness and turn terror into peace. I've learned that miracles aren't just stories from ancient books. They're happening now. Today. In war zones and hospitals and quiet moments of desperation when we run out of options and all we have left is a prayer we barely believe. I've learned that survival isn't always about skill or strength or training. Sometimes it's about grace. Unearned. Undeserved. Impossible grace that reaches down into our darkness and pulls us out. And I've learned that when you've been saved like that, when you've felt the hand of God steady you when you should have fallen, you can't go back to living like it didn't happen. It changes you. It has to. There are still hard days. Days when the memories come back sharp and cutting. Days when I wonder why I was saved when so many others weren't. Survivor's guilt, the therapists call it, and maybe that's part of it. But it's more than that. It's the weight of knowing that my life isn't entirely my own anymore. I was given something on that ridge. A second chance. A purpose. A story that needs telling. And I carry that weight not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Emma and I had a son 3 years ago. We named him Gabriel. Angel name. Not subtle, I know, but I don't care. Every time I look at him, every time I hold him and feel his heartbeat against my chest, I think about that ridge. I think about the light. I think about the voice telling me I was safe. And I realize that if God hadn't shown up that night, he wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be here to be his father, to teach him to walk and read him stories and show him how big and strange and sacred the world is. My survival rippled forward into his existence. And probably into 100 other things I'll never know about. Moments and people and futures that hang on the thread of that one impossible night. I don't have all the answers. I don't know why God saved me and not others. I don't know why he stays silent in some moments and speaks in others. I don't know how light can fall from heaven or how a voice can speak without sound or how terror can transform into peace in the space of a heartbeat. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that on a ridge in a country I can't name, when I had run out of ammunition and options and hope, something beyond this world reached down and held me. If you're reading this, if you've made it this far, maybe you're looking for answers too. Maybe you're wondering if God is real. If he sees you. If he cares about the desperate prayers you whisper when no one's listening. I can't prove anything to you. I can't give you scientific data or physical evidence. All I have is my story. But I'll tell you this. The God I met on that ridge wasn't distant or cold or indifferent. He was close. He was warm. He was powerful enough to stop an ambush with light and gentle enough to whisper peace into a terrified heart. And if he showed up for me, a doubting soldier who'd never really believed, then he can show up for you. Maybe he already has and you didn't recognize it. Maybe he's waiting for you to stop running and turn around. Maybe your miracle won't look like mine. Maybe it'll be quieter, smaller, easier to dismiss. But that doesn't make it less real. Grace doesn't always announce itself with pillars of light. Sometimes it's just a door that opens when all the others have closed. A person who calls at exactly the right moment. A strength you didn't know you had. A peace that passes understanding. I'm not telling you this story to convert you or convince you or win an argument. I'm telling it because it's true. And because silence felt like betrayal. God saved my life. He saved me when there was no human way out. And if my telling that story helps even one person believe that they're not alone, that there's something bigger and kinder than the darkness, then every hard conversation and awkward moment and time someone called me crazy will have been worth it. Staff Sergeant David Torres, United States Army Infantry, saved by grace on a ridge I'll never forget. That's who I am now. Not because of what I did, but because of what was done for me. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live like it matters. Trying to be worthy of that moment when heaven touched earth and whispered my name. If you're in darkness right now, if you're trapped on your own ridge with nowhere to go and no one to help, I want you to know this. You're not alone. Even when it feels like you are. Even when the radio's dead and the ammunition's gone and fear is the only thing that feels real. You're not alone. And sometimes when we're at the absolute end of ourselves, when we've tried everything and failed, when all we have left is a desperate prayer to a God we're not sure is listening, that's when the light falls. That's when grace breaks through. That's when we discover that the universe isn't random and cold, but shot through with a presence that knows our names and counts our tears and moves mountains to save us. I shouldn't be alive. By every human measure, I should have died on that ridge with my brothers beside me. But I'm here. I'm breathing. I'm holding my son and loving my wife and telling this story because something impossible happened. Because God is real. Because miracles still happen. Because even in the darkest valleys, even on the most desperate ridges, light falls from heaven and whispers. You are safe. Get up. Move forward. That's my story. That's my witness. And whether you believe it or not, I'll keep telling it. Because some truths are too important for silence. Because someone out there needs to hear that when they hit rock bottom, when they've run out of ammunition and options and hope, when they whisper a prayer they barely believe to a God they're not sure exists, He hears. He sees. He comes. Maybe not the way you expect. Maybe not on your timeline. But He comes. And when He does, everything changes. I've spent 7 years trying to make sense of that night. Trying to fit it into boxes that make rational sense. Trying to explain it in ways that won't make people think I'm crazy. But I'm done with that. I'm done shrinking the miracle to make other people comfortable. What happened on that ridge was real. More real than anything else I've experienced before or since. And if telling that truth costs me credibility or makes people uncomfortable or gets me labeled as some religious fanatic, so be it. Because the alternative is silence. And silence is its own kind of lie. I was saved by something I didn't earn and couldn't explain. I was pulled back from the edge of death by a force that defied every law of physics and logic. I heard the voice of God in the darkness. And I refused to pretend that didn't happen just to make my story more palatable. So here it is. All of it. The fear and the faith and the impossible moment when light fell from heaven and changed everything. Take it or leave it. Believe it or don't. But know that it's true. And know that the same God who showed up for a doubting soldier on a mountain ridge in the middle of nowhere can show up for you. Wherever you are. Whatever you're facing. However deep the darkness feels. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not beyond reach. And when you cry out, even if it's just a whisper, even if you're not sure anyone's listening, He hears. I'm living proof. Staff Sergeant David Torres. Saved by grace. Changed by light. And spending the rest of my life telling anyone who will listen that miracles are real and God is close and hope is never as lost as it seems. That's my story. That's my truth. And I'm not keeping silent anymore.